Crestfall City lived under a low ceiling of smoke. It seeped from old factories along the river and from the mouths of men who let their cigars smolder until the ash lengthened and fell like gray snow. From his office window on the 8th floor of the Stretto building, Giovanni Stretto watched the city's bruised twilight and listened to the sound of the elevator cables humming behind the paneled wall. He was a big man built of old stone, broad shoulders, thick wrists, a stubborn jaw, but time had carved lines into his face that armor couldn't hide. In the glass, his own reflection looked like a ghost standing in the city's haze. He didn't turn when a young soldier knocked, easing the door open with a respectful nod. "Mr. Stretto, they're ready downstairs." Giovanni lifted a cigarette from the box that no one else touched and crossed to the leather chair near the window. "Give me a minute." "Yes, sir." The kid's eyes swept the room, caught on the photograph on the sideboard. Giovanni in his 20s, flanked by younger men whose faces the city had erased long ago. And then he left, closing the door as if afraid any sudden sound would break something fragile. Whispers. They'd begun as little cracks in the plaster of the building. Nothing you notice until a piece falls, dusty and soft, onto a desk. Rival factions testing his fences. A rival boss, Marco Bellini, with a laugh that sounded like a knife being drawn. And now, murmurs inside his own house, money missing from the slow accounts, drop sites burned, men in blue turning up suspiciously close to their business. Giovanni knew betrayal when it changed the air. It always smelled colder, polished by newness, hollow with the promise that another mouth was being fed. He rubbed his forehead, thumb on a scar where a bottle had once exploded. "You always said men betray for 2 reasons," he said to the empty room. "For the wrong kind of fear, and for the wrong kind of love." He was speaking to a voice decades dead, his father's voice from the basement bakery where the Strettos had kept money in flour sacks and secrets in the ovens. The city had devoured the bakery and left skyscrapers in its gut. Giovanni had grown out of that basement with a loyalty that felt like bone. He lit the cigarette, took a drag, and watched the ash bloom. He knew his house. Knew every scar and draft, knew who avoided his eyes in the hallway and who met them with too much boldness. But knowing and proving were different. In this city, proof was a bloodstain that refused to wash out. The door opened again without a knock. Only one person did that. Lucia Morty slid into the room with the self-possession of someone who had never been told she didn't belong. Mid-30s, sharp cheekbones like knives under skin, dark hair pinned back, she moved with intent. She shut the door and stood without ceremony in front of him. "I've got something," she said. Her voice could be warm when she wanted it to be. Tonight it was winter. Giovanni exhaled smoke. "Then you tell me." She crossed to the desk, spread out a ledger and a crisp sheet typed with neat columns. "The numbers from the Northside warehouses. Look at the last digits across 3 weeks." She tapped with a pen. 2, 4, 6, 8, then breaks. The pattern repeats with minor variation, except here. Her pen circled a set of entries. The sequence looks random. But if you strip the even numbers, you get this. She slid another paper forward, letters underscoring numbers like a magician's reveal. BELL, then INI, Marco's name spelled in the bones of the books. Giovanni didn't blink. "Who has access to this ledger?" Lucia met his eyes. "You, me, Franco for cross-checking, Enzo when he audits weekly. The bookkeeper, Vince, numbers Ruggieri under supervision." "Numbers can barely spell his name without his finger," Giovanni said. "And Enzo. Loyal like the dog that chew his own leg before he left your side." "Then there S. Franco," Lucia said, tone steady. "Your oldest friend, the one no one would question if he made a correction. Or," she let the word hang, "it could be a frame." Someone planting something to misdirect. Giovanni's jaw shifted. The sound of rain began against the window, the city trying to rinse itself clean. "I won't let suspicion be the thing that cracks us," he said. "That's why I brought you a second piece," she said. She pulled a small envelope from her coat. "Pulled from an intercepted message. Marco uses a courier who thinks he's invisible. He dropped this near Pier 17 under a bench, sloppy as a drunk hiding a ring." She slid the paper out. It was a photograph clipped from a newspaper article about a charity event. In the top corner, someone had marked the letters SD. The ink bled slightly like an old stamp. "Saint," Giovanni said. "Stretto," Lucia said. "It's a marker. Pair that with the ledger anomaly and you get the shape of it. Someone on the inside is feeding Bellini the roots and times. Someone with access." "A clue any idiot could leave," Giovanni said, but the smoke from his cigarette tasted bitter, as if the leaf had been cut. She watched him a moment longer than was polite. "We don't have to guess. We can know." He let the silence stretch, the weight of memory pressing on it. Franco D'Amato had held a gun steady beside him in an alley in '92 when a man with a machete ran at them screaming. Franco's shot had taken the man in the throat. He'd carried Giovanni's youngest son's coffin and stood beside him after the boy's fever took him before his first steps. He'd kept the accounts honest when everyone else's fingers were sticky. A loyalty older than some of the buildings in view. But the city didn't honor age, it honored leverage. "What do you need?" he said at last. "Trust to do this right," Lucia said. "And it's going to hurt no matter who bleeds." He nodded once. "Do it." Down on the street, Enzo Carbone walked like the sidewalk belonged to him. He cut a bulldog profile, neck thick, shoulders rounding forward as if his body had adapted to an invisible weight. Enzo knew most men expected violence from him, and that expectation could be used like a bludgeon. In his head, his mother's voice still told him to wash his hands before supper, and his own voice reminded him there were lines you didn't cross: mothers, kids, and the old. His hand had broken plenty of faces, but he still carried a rosary tucked into the glove box of his car like a secret promise. His partner that night was a kid named Nico, a fresh crew member with a grin too easy for this work. "You hear about Southbridge?" Nico said as they walked toward a lone shop with a neon sign fluttering. "I tried to skip. Little Rabbit found him chewing his nails at a bus station." Enzo grunted, scanning the street the way shadows leaned and traffic slowed. "You say rabbit and you smile like it's funny, Nico, but getting desperate makes a man unpredictable. A cornered rabbit bites, remember that?" Nico nodded, then tried on seriousness. "I remember." Inside the loan office, the owner had his hands folded like a penitent. He was late on his protection envelope, and Enzo didn't need to say much. He didn't like to. He kept his words for when they mattered, for when they made something more stable than fear. After, back in the car, Enzo rested his hands on the wheel and looked at the traffic signal pulsing red. "You feel it," he said. "Feel what?" Nico asked. "The way people look at us like they think we're stupid, like they know something we don't." He looked up at the sky that had gone deep purple, rain tapping the windshield soft as fingertips. "When there are whispers, I don't like the quiet that comes after." "It's like the city's holding its breath." Nico shrugged. "I don't listen to whispers." Enzo smiled despite himself. "You should start." He shifted into drive, and the car slid into traffic. On the other side of the city, a woman wiped the bar with an efficiency that made her invisible. Detective Rachel Flynn had cut her hair shorter than regulation and traded her badge for an apron, her eyes for their usual sharpness for the soft focus of someone who belonged. She had been deep undercover for 3 months now, moving through the Stretto family's orbit as a bartender at La Paloma, the lounge they used as a meeting place. She poured, she watched, she listened. She wrote nothing down. The notes lived in the quiet of her head. Rachel had joined the force because her father had died on the wrong side of a gun, and because the city's corners were dark, and because she believed in a version of justice that could be measured. Working Crestfall had taught her that numbers were a language and a lie. The Strettos didn't fit into clean lines. Men who did terrible things tipped better than corporate lawyers and asked after her mother when she mentioned she was ill. She'd watched Giovanni tuck a wallet into a kid's pocket when he thought no one saw. She'd watched a soldier kneel to talk to a dog stranded in a holiday crowd. She'd also watched them break a man's hand with a hammer in the back room for skimming. The human math didn't come out even. Lucia Morty came into La Paloma like a winter coat hung neatly on a chair, precise, composed, never out of place. Rachel had come to like her the way a doctor might like a cancer for its clean edges. Lucia ordered a club soda and leaned on the bar like it could give her answers. Tonight her eyes were darker, and she said, "You ever notice how numbers lie less than people?" Rachel smiled a bartender's smile. "Numbers can be arranged. And so can people," Lucia said softly. She lifted her glass, and Rachel watched the way her hand didn't shake. Rachel had a wire sometimes, worn beneath a camisole, the wire taped against skin that was used to secrets. Tonight, she wasn't wired. She took Lucia's money, tucked it into the register, and told herself that getting close to Lucia was just part of the job. But when Lucia glanced up at the TV mounted above the bar, a grainy feed of the news showing Marco Bellini stepping out of a townhouse, face impassive, the caption reading, "Businessman speaks at youth center as if the city didn't choke on the word," Rachel felt a surge of something personal. It wasn't sympathy. It was an understanding that this room, with its soft lamplight and cushion of music, could be burned to the ground if certain lines were crossed. She had seen burn marks before. She had smelled hair singed from a woman's head after a home invasion went wrong. Lines mattered. In a booth at the back, Franco D'Amato sat with two men, one of them the bookkeeper whose hands trembled when the numbers didn't square. Franco had a face that had become handsome by age, lines carved by laughter and fury into something dignified. Rachel had served him 1,000 times and noted how he always said please. It made him seem like a person. It was the worst kind of camouflage. Later, after her shift, she wrote nothing down again, only sat in her car and watched the rain streak the windshield and thought about how a life could be sorted into evidence or memory and how often the file folders matched. She decided to be both cautious and brave the next day. The city required both, sometimes in the same breath. The first bullet took the windshield out of Enzo's car as he turned onto Martin Street by the river. The glass spidered and then slid in a sheet as if the car were shedding its skin. Nico cursed, grabbing the dashboard as Enzo yanked the wheel. Something popped in the rear tire and the car lurched, dragging rubber. "Out!" Enzo shouted. "Down!" He shoved the door open and rolled, landing against a curb slick with rain. The air filled with the whine of ricochets and the flat bark of automatics. Across the street, shadows moved behind the burned-out skeleton of a laundromat. Enzo's world narrowed to a series of coordinates. Cover, return fire, get the kid behind the engine block, count 5, move. He returned fire, his own pistol barking sharp and angry, and saw one shadow stumble. Nico was breathing hard, eyes white. "Call it in," Enzo said. "To who?" "To whoever still has a voice." A van came around the corner, its headlights cutting a slick path on wet pavement. Enzo felt the wrongness in his chest before he saw the open door and the muzzle flash. He dove, tugging Nico with him. The kid yelled, a high sound that made Enzo's jaw lock. He swore and fired until his clip was empty, then slammed a fresh magazine home with a practiced motion, the click as satisfying as a seatbelt. The men in the van were sloppy. They sprayed instead of shot. One of them leaned too far, and Enzo put a bullet into his throat, watching the man fold like bad origami. Sirens wailed, not theirs, never theirs, but the city's default shudder of alarms when someone pushed the wrong button. The van peeled out, a door banging open like a mouth. The shadows in the laundromat scattered. Enzo waited, counting breaths. Then he looked down at Nico. The kid had gone quiet. Blood was slicking his shirt where a bullet had entered low. "No, no," Enzo said under his breath, dragging the kid back behind cover. "Stay with me." He pressed his hands against the wound and felt the way warmth becomes cold too quickly. Nico's eyes focused on his face and tried to find somewhere else to look. He made a sound like apology. "Don't," Enzo said. His voice was a command and a prayer. "You don't get to apologize. You get to breathe." But the kid's breath was already leaving the room like the last song in a bar. Enzo looked up into the rain and screamed once, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. Then he climbed to his knees and scanned the street for a sign, any sign of who had held the guns. Back at the Stretto building, Enzo stood in front of Giovanni with blood drying on his knuckles and said, "Bellini's men or someone who wants it to look like Bellini. They had a van, black, no plates, too eager. They took shots they didn't need to." His voice was flat, stripped of anything that could break. Giovanni nodded slowly, thinking in chains. "They knew your route." "Yeah," Enzo said. He didn't like the taste in his mouth. It tasted like copper and like a name he didn't want to say out loud. "Somebody fed them." Lucia stood by the door, arms folded, her eyes doing arithmetic. "We're done waiting," she said. "Time for a different kind of math." Giovanni looked at the blood on Enzo's sleeves and thought of the children he had buried and the men he had made. He thought of the softness of bread and the hardness of bone. He nodded once. "Do it, Lucia. Set the table." Lucia's plan had been cooking like a stew she stirred every hour, adding spices, tasting for patience. She set the trap with strands of information like tripwires. A negotiation with Bellini, she said, a possibility to stop the bleeding on both sides. They always used words like possibility and honor and territory. They never said what they meant. Peace is a useful lie. She sent 3 versions of the meeting's details through 3 separate channels. Version A said Thursday at Pier 17, midnight. Version B said Friday at the Glassworks. 1 a.m. Version C said Thursday at Pier 17. 2 a.m. She handed version A to Enzo in the hallway, her voice low. Version B went to Vince Numbers, with Franco present as a witness. Version C, folded neatly, she tucked into Giovanni's pocket herself as she hugged him in a way that would look normal to a lobby camera. In truth, it didn't matter what Giovanni believed. Bellini would only know what someone told him. And the someone who told him would reveal their outline when the shadows moved. Rachel watched the bustle at La Paloma with a heightened sense of focus. Meetings had a rhythm, an uptick of urgency. She had ears everywhere without leaving her stool, heard the word Glassworks spoken once like an accident, heard a muttered Pier 17, caught the smell of fear in the napkins. She made a choice. She drove to a parking garage near the pier and sat with her phone on her thigh, her thumb hovering above a number that would bring a unit faster than a confession. But something stopped her, a new piece in a puzzle that had started to feel like a maze. If she called in the cavalry bluntly, without understanding the full map, men would die in stupid numbers. If she was going to keep her oath, she had to be strategic. Justice wasn't a sledgehammer tonight. It had to be a scalpel. She made a different call. An old contact in Organized, a man who had learned how to listen. "It's Flynn," she said when he picked up. "You trust me. I'm listening. I need 2 cars back and quiet, and I need them 10 minutes late. Markers off. Nobody hot dogs. We're not going to make arrests tonight. We're going to confirm a leak and keep bodies from piling up." "Flynn," the voice said, loaded with doubt and history. "You're asking me to look away." "I'm asking you to look sideways," she said, watching the water beat itself to white foam against the rock. "You'll get your headline, just not yet." At Pier 17, the wind came off the river and made men reach for their collars and feel their age. Shipping containers stacked like Lego blocks rose into the night, graffiti blurring into something more ancient in the dark. Lucia arranged Stretto men in sectors, using phrases like "watch the angles," and "if they squeeze left, we breathe right," as if they were a pair of lungs instead of men with guns and pride. Enzo stood near a container, hand on the butt of his pistol, heart a metronome tamped down. He had put Nico into the ground that afternoon in a family plot that felt enormous and small. He had placed a rosary in the kid's casket and promised something to a god he negotiated with like a stubborn landlord. Giovanni arrived without fanfare, stepping out of a black sedan into the stink of the river. He nodded to the men but looked at no one too long. Franco walked at his side, the older man's profile carved into stone by the night. Franco leaned in only once and made a low murmur at Giovanni's ear. Giovanni did not respond. Lucia wore a long dark coat that could be mistaken for a dress in the right light. She moved to a position near the open area where the meeting would happen. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. Unknown number, a single text, 10 minutes. She didn't need to ask who it was. She felt the fine wires of law and loyalty tightening across the pier. Marco Bellini came with 5 men, 6 if you counted his smirk. He had chosen a wool coat that made him look like an expensive blade. He walked like someone who'd learned intimidation young and decided he preferred it to charm. He extended a hand to Giovanni that no one took, then withdrew it with a shrug as if to say, "You had your chance at civility and you threw it away." "Giovanni," Marco said, voice low, intimate in a way that felt like fingers tracing the wrong side of skin. "You've got gray in your hair I don't remember, makes you look wise." "Time does things to us all," Giovanni said. "Except me," Marco said, smiling. "I age like wine." His eyes slid to Lucia, cataloging, then to Enzo, calculating, then back to Giovanni, settling on the face that held the math and the past. Let's talk about why we're here. We're here because men are dying, Giovanni said. 2 nights ago, your people opened fire on my car. My people. Marco widened his eyes, fake innocence polishing them. Your car has been shot at by better men than mine, Giovanni. He paused, then tilted his head. Besides, I hear one of your young bloods got sloppy. That's not on me, that's on your internal affairs. The words landed like pebbles flicked at a sleeping dog. Enzo's jaw clenched. Lucia didn't move. Giovanni's face didn't change. Your men were at Martin Street, Lucia said. Her voice was factual, almost bored. Black van, missing plates, 2 shooters in the laundromat. Anonymous tip to a cop who likes his overtime in cash. Sound familiar? Marco shrugged. Grief makes you see patterns. He tapped his chin as if thinking, then added, casual, Pier 17. 2 a.m. It's an interesting choice for a meeting. He said the words like he was laying down a card in a game. The time, not midnight. 2 a.m. Lucia's heart made no sound, but it felt loud in her throat. She looked at Giovanni. She had given Enzo midnight. She had given Vince, with Franco present, the glassworks at 1. She'd given Giovanni 2 a.m. and a hug. Only one person had 2 a.m. Pier 17, Giovanni. But Giovanni hadn't told anyone, but she moved her eyes and saw Franco's profile in hard outline, emotionless as a cliff. Franco stepped forward with that old-world courtesy that had always disarmed rooms. Marco is a snake, he said, pitching his voice for the Stretto men as if he were addressing a jury that belonged to him. Everyone here knows that. Marco laughed, delighted as a child at a magic trick. Franco, you taught him well. Loyalty looks good on you, even when it's a costume. Lucia lifted a hand a fraction. Stretto men adjusted in the shadows. You could hear the river breathing. You could almost hear the click of the trap closing around something not yet visible. What do you want? Giovanni asked Marco, drawing the attention back to the center like a tide. He made his voice the thing it had always been, a table men gathered around. Simple, Marco said. Northside, your shipments through their end. You give me the spindle and the old silk market. You keep your West District laundries because I'm a generous man. And you stop poaching from the Southbridge crews I've bought. They eat at my table now. He smiled. In exchange, I stop cutting your throat. And my grandchildren? Giovanni asked softly. You let them walk to school without counting steps. I'll even send them a driver, Marco said. With my compliments. Giovanni nodded as someone nods at a eulogy said badly. You came to a negotiation with an appetite and a dirk, he said. You didn't come for peace. I came, Marco said, because someone sent me a very nice map. His eyes slid past Giovanni to Franco, then returned as if he were too kind to say what he wanted outright. It was enough. The air changed temperature. In Lucia's pocket, her phone buzzed twice. The police cars were late by 10 minutes on purpose and right on time for her purposes. Franco, Giovanni said, still without turning. His voice used Franco's name gently, as if he were waking a friend. How long? Franco's face didn't move for a heartbeat. Then he said with tired dignity, long enough to keep us from the cliff and not long enough to turn my coat. He looked at Lucia like he'd always known she could do exacting harm. You set 3 tables and chose the one with the best view. Clever. Enzo took a step forward, the kind of step that split seconds. Tell me why, he said in a voice that grew like a crack in a wall. Franco looked at him, and then at Giovanni, and what was in his eyes wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was a grief that had been lifting weight in private for months. Because the city is changing, he said. Because you won't let it change you. Because you would rather pour blood into potholes than close one lane. Because they came to my daughter's house and smiled at my grandson and told him they liked his dog. Because they knew the name of his school. His voice shook once. Because I gave them misdirections and partials and bought us time where I could, and still they were at our door. Marco clucked his tongue. He's a poet tonight. Shut up, Enzo snarled, and the word carried enough weight that even Marco's men shifted. Enzo looked back at Franco, and the hot thing inside him cooled to something more dangerous. You could have come to us. I did, Franco said, and in his glance at Giovanni there was more accusation than regret. I told him to sit. I told him to spin the wheel and find a new story. He believed he could be the last man to hold a line. Giovanni's silence was its own weapon. He thought of a small boy's fever that no doctor had been able to break, and how he had held the boy's hand and told him stories about bread. He thought of the men he had put into the ground, and the men he had lifted out of gutters and placed at proper tables. He thought of his father and the basement, oven, and the smell of burned flour when numbers had to be hidden. He thought of Franco's laugh and their stupid victories over men who were now both dirt and legend. He thought of honor and how much of it came wrapped in the faces of those watching you. Lucia took a step toward him, her voice low enough for only his ears. "If you don't cut clean, we bleed from the mouth," she said. "He took our bones and traded 2 for a promise. If you let that live, everything we built is a rumor." Giovanni nodded, a slow movement that looked like a man turning to face the ocean he had always known he would drown in. He looked at Franco. "Mi fratello," he said softly, and the old language made the words both smaller and larger. "There were other ways." Franco opened his hands empty. "Not that you could accept." They stood like that for a fraction of history. Then the fraction ended. Giovanni raised his hand, and the gun in it looked like an answer that had been written before he was born. His fingers didn't tremble. Enzo's breath ratcheted once. Lucia's eyes remained steady, a witness and a participant. Marco's smirk struggled to decide whether it ought to stay. Giovanni put the first bullet into Franco's chest where the heart was and the second into his head to make mercy precise. Franco fell like a man who had practiced falling in prayer. The men around them inhaled as one organism, then released it, some with anger, some with relief, some with awe at the clarity of violence when it is done for reasons they can name. Marco applauded twice, slow. "There he is," he said, "the king with ash on his hands." Enzo moved like he'd been uncaged. He lunged forward, and 2 of Marco's men stepped, and suddenly the pier was a boil of movement, guns rising like arguments. Lucia lifted her hand and shouted, "Hold!" enough to stop the Stretto men at least. Police sirens wailed in a distance that was almost close. Rachel's 2 unmarked cars glided into a shadowed position near the access road, silent as thought. "Tonight we walk away," Lucia said, voice cutting the chaos like wire. "We did what we came to do." "We came," Enzo growled, "to commit a murder we owed. We also owe more." His eyes blazed red. Nico was a ghost standing just over his right shoulder, and Nico's mother was sobbing into a cushion in a living room with bad wallpaper. Enzo had sworn on something invisible. Marco shook his head, amused. "He's going to sprint into his own grave," he told Giovanni. "You can't hold your men when their blood is up. That's always been your problem." Giovanni put his gun back in his coat pocket and looked big and tired. "There will be other nights," he said, and the words felt biblical and broken. "Or," Marco said, and a new tone slid into his voice like oil into water, "there can be one night that ends it. I've got something you don't, something important. It's in the glassworks now, moving tonight. You try to stop it, and maybe we all meet on softer ground." He stepped backward, and his men did the clever thing of matching him. "Or you can go home and kiss your wives," he smiled, "if you still have them." Lucia's phone buzzed again, a new text. Glassworks, movement, now. She made a connection too quick to control her own face. The version given to Vince in Franco's presence had been glassworks at 1 a.m. Franco was gone, but the plan might have grown another head. Or Marco was bluffing, using the noise to lure them. The city loved double binds. Rachel watched from the shadow of a crane, a baseball cap pulled low. She had her service pistol under her jacket and a badge that felt like an insult tonight. She saw the rhythm of the men change when the older one fell. The grief wave hit, and then receded. She saw Lucia hold the center like a spine and Enzo wobble like a loose tooth. She raised her phone, sent a text, hold near glassworks. No lights, no sirens. She knew she had taken responsibility for bodies that might still hit the ground. She also knew that waiting for the perfect moment in the city was like waiting on rain to fall upward. Back in the cars, Enzo drove like he could strangulate the steering wheel. Lucia sat beside him, her profile hard as the city's skyline in winter. Giovanni followed in a second car, quiet in the back, a ghost sitting beside him where Franco had always sat. They moved through streets that had sewed themselves around their roots long ago, corners where kids had once thrown balls and now did not because someone had told them to keep their heads down. The glassworks had died when the city stopped making things and started making deals. It had been repurposed for art shows and pop-up events, then abandoned to pigeons and dreams of renovation. Tonight the doors were open, like a mouth moaning about a toothache. Inside, scaffolding made a steel forest, and broken windows let the wind scrawl complaints across the concrete. Lucia signaled the men to fan out. She set Enzo on the south door with 2 others and moved herself toward the northern catwalk, where she could see and hear and make calculus happen. Giovanni stayed near the floor's center, a figure calm enough to be gravity. He did not show that he was carrying a fresh grief like a new organ in his chest. They heard them before they saw them. Marco's men moving in with a confidence that suggested a plan whose edges they believed they owned. What they had instead was a tangle. Enzo saw a shadow and put a bullet into it before the shadow had a face. The shadow shrieked and fell, then crawled, printing blood as if it were writing a letter. The sound of gunfire rolled around the glass like a bad choir. And then Rachel's 2 unmarked cars slipped to the building's flanks. The officers inside, plainclothes who had learned to drift, took positions quietly, weapons drawn, staying low. Orders were murmurs. The city's official reaction was intentionally late. Marco stepped into the light pooling beneath a skylight and clapped again, as if it were theater. "You followed," he said, grinning. "I'm flattered. We're here to pick up what's ours," Lucia said, "and send you home with empty hands." Marco's face shifted into something like pity. "You don't even know what's in the box," he said. Behind him, 2 men were hauling a crate marked with the symbol of a shipping company that existed and did not exist. "You thought it was guns, ammo maybe. But what I have is more fun." He tipped a finger. "Ledgers, names, payments, it sings when you open it. Cop names, judge names, your name's Giovanni, my gifts to the future. You think I keep my blood in one vein?" Lucia felt the cold slide into her spine. Information trumped bullets when wielded well. If Marco had what he claimed, he had weapons you couldn't shoot out of a hand. "You brought it here," she said, skeptical. "Bait needs to smell good," Marco said. "You come, I win." "You don't, I win. The magic trick is for the audience, not the magician." Giovanni stepped forward. "You talk because you like the sound," he said. "Your words are the only thing you can put your hands on that don't get you dirty." "Dirty?" Marco laughed. "I have a different kind of dirt." He flicked a look at Enzo. "I own the ground under your feet more than you do." The room breathed in, then held. Lucia made a signal that sent 2 men to flank the crate. They moved with practiced ease and then froze as 3 lasers appeared on their chests. Someone up on the catwalk had finally done the sensible thing and brought a long gun. Rachel's stomach dropped. One shot could turn the night into a massacre. She moved before she thought about moving. She slid along the wall, up a set of stairs that had listened to a century of footfalls. On the catwalk, a man with a rifle lay prone, cheek to stock, his breath slow like someone at prayer. He had the posture of a professional. She stepped softly behind him and put a foot on the small of his back and the gun to the base of his skull. "Don't!" she whispered. His body went stiff. He turned his head a fraction. "Who? Don't!" she said again, and took the rifle from his hands with a practiced movement. She slid it under the railing with a clatter that drew eyes, many eyes. Below, men jerked, then redirected. In the confusion, Lucia surged forward, knocked a gun out of a hand, grabbed the crate handle, and shouted, "Now!" Her men heaved, and the crate slid toward a column. Enzo broke cover. This was his element: motion, clear purpose, a target. He charged, firing in controlled bursts, moving like a man who had trained all the anger in him to go somewhere useful. He reached the crate, grabbed the other side, and together they dragged it into the shadow of the column. Bullets sparked off concrete near his head. He laughed once, a harsh, bright sound, and then a hand reached for him from the dark, thin, familiar fingers. Vince Numbers' ruggery, eyes blown wide. "Enzo, what are you doing here?" Enzo snarled. "Franco sent me earlier," Vince babbled. "To check a route. His words disappeared into a new sound, the building exhaling dust as a bullet chewed a chunk out of a pillar. "Shut up and move," Enzo said, and he shoved Vince toward the exit. He held back a second longer than someone wise would hold. He wanted to put a bullet into something that had Marco's face. He wanted to make grief matter to someone who had only used it as a word. Lucia popped the crate. Inside were binders, plastic-wrapped, each labeled with a month and a year. Fast glances gave her names. She saw a judge she'd shaken hands with once at a fundraiser, a cop who'd once asked her to dance, her own surname in a column next to numbers that didn't hurt until much later. Her stomach dropped. "He wasn't lying," she said under her breath. Marco laughed, delighted. "Fun, right?" "Not for you," a voice said behind him, and Marco's smirk faltered for the first time that night. Giovanni had moved silently, as if the years had peeled off his joints. He put a gun to Marco's kidney and said in a voice so soft it was almost kind, "End the show." Marco was one of those men who look unbeatable until they lose one thing, and then everything falls like scaffolding with one bolt removed. He lifted his hands. "They'll never let you hold this," he said, gesturing toward the crate. "Your empire's a pile of ash, paper ash." "We'll hold what we need," Lucia said. She nodded at Rachel without quite looking up. "Some ash catches fire, some smothers it." Rachel's throat went dry. In one movement, she had announced herself to both sides, and yet neither side claimed her. She had the rifle at her feet and a pistol in her hand that still smelled like oil. She watched Lucia's face. It was set, old in a way it hadn't been yesterday. Rachel had a choice. She could call in the unmarked cars, flip the lights, make arrests on both sides, scoop the binders into evidence and tell herself she had done the clean thing. Or she could do the dirty right thing. Take the binders, carve out Bellini's head from the body of his organization with the sharpness of names, and leave the Strettos wounded, but on their feet, so the city didn't erupt in a war that would turn children into collateral. Her oath tightened in her chest. She pressed her lips together and made a fast decision that felt like a betrayal to the manual and fidelity to something she thought justice was before she learned how laws were written. She moved along the catwalk toward the side stairs and descended, each step a punctuation. Down on the floor, Lucia's men had gathered the binders. Enzo stood, chest heaving, looking for something to break that would make him whole. Giovanni had not removed the gun from Marco's side. Marco had stopped talking, which was its own miracle. Rachel stepped into the circle. The Stretto men tensed. She pulled her badge, held it up so it caught light and didn't look like anything except what it was, and said, "This doesn't have to be a massacre. Hand me the binders. I'll make sure the right people see the right names." Bellini's included. She looked at Marco. "You like attention, you're going to get it." Marco laughed, regained smirk thin and vicious. "This is cute. You think you can prune a hedge in a hurricane, take the binders and you're dead in a week." Rachel ignored him and looked at Lucia. "We've shared rooms," she said simply. "I've watched you count change and change plans in the same breath. You know that if those binders go into a precinct tonight with me, half the names get a call before you can say good evening. But if they go with me and a promise and 2 cars and nobody else knowing until signatures are dry, we can end something without starting something worse." Lucia's eyes asked a question that had nothing to do with law. "You keep your word." "I took an oath," Rachel said, and the word had weight. "Not to a captain who eats from Bellini's hand, to the idea that this city can be less broken if we are careful. You want careful. I'm what careful looks like when it stops blinking." Enzo spat on the floor. "Cops don't keep promises." "Some of us do," Rachel said, not looking away. "And some of your men don't." Her eyes flicked toward the place where Franco had fallen hours before. "We choose. That's the job." Giovanni looked at the binders, at Rachel's face, at Lucia's. He tasted ash in his mouth and thought of bread again. He thought of a city where his grandchildren could walk to school without memorizing the names of the men who watched them. He made the kind of decision a man like him gets to make only a handful of times, and all the other decisions are just shadows of those few. "Give her one," he said to Lucia. "One that has enough to choke Bellini and his nose." His voice was steady. "The rest we keep until we know if the pledge is real." Marco shifted, offended. "You two are making me into a spectator at my own funeral. It's indecent." "It's efficient," Lucia said. She pulled one binder from the crate. It said, June. It was not the earliest, not the latest. It had a slice of names in a window spot administrators liked. She handed it to Rachel like you pass a child through a window during a fire. Rachel took it and felt the events of the next 84 hours press into her bones. She knew what it would take. The calls, the safe conference rooms, the leverage applied like a clamp. the careful dispersal of shock to avoid panic. She would not sleep. She would not breathe properly until the articles came out and men like Marco realized their phones would not be answered anymore by the people whose names had lived in the book. She swallowed. "I'll move," she said. "And we'll move," Lucia said, clearing her voice. "You get 10 minutes to disappear." She looked at the men. "We make like ghosts. Tonight the city will forget us." Enzo caught Lucia's arm as she turned. "I want Bellini," he said, quiet as a blade. "Not tomorrow, not a headline, now." Lucia pulled her arm free gently. "I know," she said. "And I want a world where Nico's mother stops grabbing her phone every time a door slams. We will get there, not tonight." "Your patience is a cruelty," he said. "It's a whetstone," she said. "It makes us sharp." He looked at Giovanni, the man he'd pledged himself to in a church without making the words out loud. "I can find him later," Enzo said. "I can end it where nobody sees." His jaw worked. Giovanni's voice came out of the dark with the softness of a dangerous thing that sleeps lightly. "You'll do what keeps the house standing," he said. "You'll take your rage and put it where it works for us and not against us. Or you leave my table and eat alone." Enzo's shoulders lifted and dropped. He had imagined killing Bellini in half a dozen ways in the last hour. He had seen blood spray against tiles and had felt his fist connect. He had also seen Giovanni's eyes when he pulled the trigger on Franco, and if that was what duty looked like, then maybe his own satisfaction was a poor meal tonight. He nodded once, the gesture of a man who has chosen a hard thing on purpose. "I'm not eating alone," he said. They pulled out, leaving the glassworks with a different echo living inside it. Rachel went the other way, the binder on her passenger seat, her heart punching holes in her chest. She dialed her contact. "It's Flynn," she said when he answered. "I'm delivering you a throat. You're going to bite and you're going to chew, and you're not going to let anyone nearby know you're at the table until you've swallowed." "Jesus, Flynn," the voice said. "You know what you're doing." "Sometimes," she said. "Right now, yes." She hung up before he could add doubt to the car's air. Over the next 3 days, the city did one of its old tricks. It pretended to be calm while its heart raced. Headlines began to bubble, rumor in rooms, leaks from sources who weren't supposed to leak, men seen leaving offices with boxes that might have contained family photographs or years of compromise. A judge retired suddenly. A captain took a leave of absence. A businessman visited his mother in the country with an overnight bag he thought was inconspicuous. Above the fold on the 4th day, Bellini organization under investigation for public corruption, key names alleged in new documents. The lead photo was Marco with his hand up like a man hailing a cab or warding off the future. In his townhouse, Marco read the paper and didn't smile. He left by a side door and found the alley empty. He walked fast, and for the first time in years he checked over his shoulder twice in the space of 1 block. Men like him understood leverage. He had just lost a kind. He drove to the river, moving like a piece on a board that suddenly had fewer squares. At a light, a motorcycle slid in behind him and then split off. In a construction zone, a man with a clipboard looked up at him and then down. Marco pulled onto a service road lined with chain-link fence and weeds. He parked, cut the engine, and closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, Enzo Carbone was sitting in the passenger seat, his big body somehow quiet. Marco didn't reach for a gun. He knew better than to play in a lane he didn't have time for. "If you were going to do it," he said, "you would have done it behind a bar in daylight or outside a church. You like performance." Enzo's face didn't move. "You talk because you're afraid of the quiet." "So do you," Marco said easily. They sat like that, breathing in the dust and the smell of old water. Enzo set a small photograph on the dashboard. Nico, with that sloppy grin, holding a fish and a picture someone had printed at a drugstore. Marco glanced at it and then back. He didn't shrug, but his face thought about it. "You made him," Enzo said. "You made him dead. You put his mother in a room with a box and a silence. You like doing that." "Do you want me to answer?" Marco asked, genuinely curious. Enzo's hand flexed. He had thought about using a knife because knives made men look at you. He had thought about using nothing but his hands. He had thought about doing the honorable thing and walking away and letting paper do the work. He had decided not to decide until he had to. "I want to watch you count," he said instead. "Count all the names you thought you owned. Count the ways out you lost when you started playing with ledgers you didn't understand. Count your friends." Marco smiled then, cold, tattered. You think I don't have more? I think, Enzo said softly, about hungry dogs. They bite even when you give them meat. He leaned forward, put his hand on the steering wheel, and squeezed until the leather creaked. I promised someone I wouldn't do something tonight, he said. I'm going to keep that promise. I'm going to let the city eat you the way it eats soft men. But you and me, we'll see each other again, somewhere quiet, no speeches. He opened the door. Marco watched him go. His heart did that thing the city could make it do when it realized the game was no longer the same game. He clenched his jaw, then unclenched it. When he reached to start the car, his hand shook in a way he would not mention to anyone. In the Stretto building, Giovanni sat at his desk with a cup of black coffee and looked at the morning. The city had washed itself in its own rain and still looked dirty. He didn't smoke. The cigarette sat untouched like a row of small soldiers. Lucia stood across from him with a folder that showcased a war's worth of math. We've bought ourselves time, she said. Not peace. Time is the only real currency, he said. His voice had that old weight again, but the echo was different now. What's left on the table? Northside is ours this month, she said. We pulled crews from Southbridge to cover our soft points. The laundries keep turning. The judge who used to make our parking tickets disappear is under a microscope. We'll have to avoid the spotlight by leaving lights off. She hesitated. Franco's people. I've placed them, he said. Those who didn't know can stay. Those who did know are taking a trip. You cut rot out, then you make soup with bones. We won't waste what we can use. He looked past her, into the memory of a warehouse where a man had fallen twice from his bullets. I don't feel lighter. You won't, she said. Not today, maybe not ever. She waited. Do you hate me for how I did it? Giovanni's eyes eased. I put the gun in my hand, he said. You put the truth in front of it. If I hate anything, it is what needing to do it makes of us. She nodded, accepting that as absolution or as a statement of fact. Either way, useful. Rachel walked into a conference room with a window that overlooked a river that did its best to look clean. She put the binder down in front of men whose suits cost more than the car she'd learned to drive in. You will not leak, she said. You will not preen. You will do your jobs as if the city mattered more than your next promotion. One of them leaned back. Detective, she cut him off. I'm not interested in your detective word. I'm interested in whether you can do something difficult and shut up about it. Names in that binder took money from a man who is about to become very small. You can join him, or you can wear the right side of this. She felt tired down to bone. Pick! They did. They would tell themselves stories later about their own heroism or savvy. She didn't care. She watched their eyes as they became scavengers for legitimacy, and she felt a small pity, and then she put it away. On the fifth night, Rachel came into La Paloma in civilian clothes and sat at the end of the bar. Lucia was there remarkably, her posture relaxed in the way a cat relaxes on a ledge it could survive if it fell. Rachel lifted a finger. Lucia came over. Drink, Lucia asked. Club soda, Rachel said. She smiled with half her mouth. I think we're both off anything harder. Lucia poured. She said after a moment, the binder did what it needed to do. I know, Rachel said. I watched my boss pretend to be surprised. He's a better actor than I gave him credit for. You could still arrest me, Lucia said. No challenge, no dare, just a math problem. I could, Rachel said. I could also get a little boy killed if I don't understand how a thing fits. She looked at Lucia. I'm not naive. I'm not bending because I think you deserve it. I'm bending because if the city breaks, it cuts people who can't afford stitches. Lucia nodded. And because you and I, she lifted her glass, like our illusions. Rachel clinked her glass to Lucia as without the sound of triumph. I like my plans to avoid body bags. She paused. There's a cost. There always is, Lucia said. You want absolution. I don't have it. You want thanks. I can't give it because the city would hear and take it away. You want to know if you did the right thing? You did a thing that keeps us from getting worse today. She smiled, small and sharp. The right thing is big for a city this small. They drank their sodas like they were another kind of medicine. They didn't touch again that night. Enzo went to Nico's mother's apartment and fixed the cabinet door that had always hung wrong and replaced the light bulb that had burnt out over the sink. He didn't say much. She said even less. He put an envelope on the counter and didn't explain it. She didn't look at it. He liked you, she said at last, as if the liking were something to put into a box. I liked him, Enzo said. He felt the itch in his fists, the steady hunger for a violence that didn't feel like stupidity. He would starve it until it was small enough to fit in a pocket. He was better than this. He wanted to be you, she said. He flinched. He could have been better than me, he said. He held her eyes. I'm going to make the man who made him gone pay attention to the dark. That's a promise that doesn't belong in church. She nodded once. I don't want to know, she said. You won't, he said. He waited a beat, then left, the hallway smelling of cooking and old smoke and the city. Giovanni returned to the office window that had seemed different every day of his life and found that now it looked the same as it always had. The city was slow rain and quick lies and the wheeze of elevators. He lit a cigarette and let the ash lengthen until it fell. He saw his reflection and for a moment Franco's behind him. He turned and it was gone. There were ghosts enough. He did not need to invite more. A young soldier knocked and opened the door with the same careful nod. Mr. Stretto, it's all done with D'Amato's boys. Giovanni nodded. Treat the ones who didn't know like allies. Treat the ones who did like strangers in our house, he said, and leave flowers on his grave. He paused. From me. The kid nodded and went, relieved to be given something that looked like honor even if he didn't understand it. Lucia came in later with a map of their remaining alliances, redrawn in thin marker lines. We can hold, she said. We'll bleed a little, we'll pretend to be smaller, we'll be big in our quiet. Giovanni smiled without his eyes. Can you carry it? She looked at the map like it was a landscape she had always wanted to walk. Yes, she said, but it will change me. It already has, he said. It's changed us all, that's the cost. Power is a story we keep buying even when the pages are smeared. He looked at the city again. There's a bakery down by the old blocks. He laughed once. Smells close to the old one. Maybe I'll go down and buy bread. Maybe the man behind the counter will look at me and wonder if I eat like ordinary men. You don't, Lucia said. He tilted his head. You eat what we all do. You just can't taste it the same. He nodded. He put out the cigarette and stood. We'll be all right, he said, and it sounded like something someone says before night falls. For now, Crestfall City exhaled. The smoke over the river thinned, then thickened again. The headlines shifted to a scandal in the school district for a day, then returned to corruption, then briefly to a sports score. People kept walking, heads bent against the wind, thinking about dinner and debt. Men who had known power woke to find that their phones stopped ringing. A woman who had promised herself she would remain unbent bent and then stood back up. A man who had thought he would never betray did. Another who had once cut another's meat in soup took a bullet because the story demanded it. At La Paloma, Rachel left a 20 on the bar for a soda and a quiet and walked out into the rain without looking back. Enzo watched from across the street, hands in his pockets, deciding whether a quiet path to Bellini would be a better revenge than a loud one. He chose quiet for now. The city recorded the choice in its own ledger. Giovanni's grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl with hair like dark rope, ran in their yard behind a gate that had been oiled recently, their laughter bouncing. He watched them from the kitchen window and thought of the ground under their feet. It was not clean. It would never be. But he had kept it from being swallowed by something worse for another day. He took a bite of bread from the bakery and couldn't taste anything but the smoke in the air, and then, slowly, sweetness that came late. The Stretto family stood, bruised but unbroken, the house quieter now that certain voices had been removed. They redrew their movements in notebooks that would never see court, updated their caches, adjusted their smiles. They looked smaller to the city's eye and larger to themselves. They carried the cost across their shoulders like men carrying furniture, not heavy when you lift it together. In the night, Lucia spread maps on a table and made new arithmetic from old sins. Enzo drove without destination and turned down streets that wanted him to turn into a different man. Rachel sent an email with an attachment and 5 blind copies, and then closed her laptop and placed her forehead against it for a second, feeling the hard, stupid comfort of objects. Marco poured a drink and didn't drink it. He stared at the door as if it were a mouth that might speak his name. And the city, having eaten its portion for the day, looked up at the ceiling of its own sky and wondered when it might rain, and whether the ash it tasted was someone else's or its own. Giovanni put his hand on the glass, and felt how cold it was. He smiled, a small, private thing, because at last he knew the truth he had been avoiding. Empire was not a crown you wore. It was the soot in your lungs you learned to live with. He breathed it in and out, and on the exhale, he saw a smear on the glass fade, and he let himself believe that, for tonight, he had paid enough. Tomorrow would collect again. It always did. He would be ready with whatever he had left, standing where the smoke met the sky, counting the cost and finding, with weary pride, that he could still afford it for one more day. In the glow of a city that feeds on loyalty and survives on betrayal, decide which ashes you can live with, like, and subscribe for more stories.